Hi guys, say hi as you come on so I know. Hey Erin! Okay, good. Looks like it's just you so far, so we'll wait a couple minutes. Or this will be a personalized presentation for you. So Erin, did you have any other questions about anything we covered yesterday? And did you run today and apply anything you learned? And those questions go out to anyone else watching too. You did your first ever actual easy run! Yay! That's awesome! I'm so proud of you. Did you notice a difference in how you felt? Like afterwards and during? And I guess if that was today, now. Hi Dre! I'm glad I finally put two and two together about who you are. So Dre, I just asked Erin this, but did you have any follow-up questions from yesterday? And did you go for an easy run today and apply any of your knowledge that you learned? Hey Lexi! I know Lexi's been applying what she's learning because she works with me and she tells me. Okay. If you guys are typing things, it's a delay to get to me. So I'm going to start what we're going to cover today, but oh, Erin, I feel like I could keep running and I don't feel fatigued at all. Good. Coughing up grossness after the run. That makes sense with asthma, yeah. Hi, Devin. Okay. So first, I'm going to do a really quick recap on what we talked about yesterday. If you guys have any questions about what we talked about, just pop them in. Oh, good. Dre tried to talk to herself a bit more on her run. Yeah, it's kind of hard to get used to running that easy. I mean, I still struggle with it, and I feel like I've known that I have to do this for a while, but it will benefit all of us in the long run. So, just as a reminder, what we're talking about right now is easy running and base building. So, the goal of base building is to develop our aerobic system so our body is more efficient in using oxygen. That's the primary energy system when we're doing our long easy runs. We also have the goal of building up to running frequently and consistently so our musculoskeletal system can handle the demands of running before we start adding on any speed or hills or extra volume, which is what we're talking about today. And so just a reminder, if you guys haven't looked at the PDF from today yet, the first three types of runs that we talked about yesterday were recovery, where it's easy to speak, your RPE is around 3 or 4. The second easiest is endurance, which is what most of our easy runs, that's what the pace is. those are conversational, RPE of 5 to 6. And then steady state, that's a little harder than our endurance, but easier than tempo, which is what we're going to talk about today. And those you can speak 2 to 3 sentences at a time, and RPE of 7. So those are the big ideas from yesterday. Also, as I'm going, feel free, leave comments, interrupt me, ask questions, interact. I like the feedback and like knowing what you guys are thinking about what I'm talking about. So first I want to start out with, why should we add speed into our routines, and who should add speed into the routines? So the short answer is everyone should add speed, even ultra runners. So if you're training for an ultra, you might think, my ultra is so long and low intensity, why should I add any speed in? And what I'm about to go over will explain that. So when we're talking about speed, we're usually talking about 2 paces that we're keeping track of. So yesterday we talked about lactate threshold heart rate and max heart rate. So on the alternative side for pace is lactate threshold pace, which is that pace where we can hold it for about an hour, and that's when the lactate production exceeds lactate utilization in our cells and it starts spilling into our bloodstream. So that's our tempo run pace usually, a sustained hard effort. And then the VO2 max pace is more in line with our max heart rate, so that's when you're running your hardest. VO2 max, if you're not familiar, is the maximum amount of oxygen your body can use, and the test that measures that basically pushes you to run as hard as you can until you can't anymore, and it measures how much oxygen you're using. So when we're talking about those 2 paces, the lactate threshold is always below our VO2 max, because that's basically our ceiling. So we incorporate speed in order to improve our body's lactate threshold, which is what our tempo runs are for, or we improve our VO2 max, which is what the running intervals are for. So what exactly are we aiming to do when we include speed? We're trying to improve our running economy. So running economy is how efficient you are as a runner. And hi Chelsea, if you improve your running economy, then you can run the same pace, the same hard pace with less effort. So you guys probably remember yesterday we were talking about, as you get more aerobically fit, you can run your easy pace a little faster with the same amount of effort. So when we're improving running economy, we're trying to improve or run a harder pace with the less effort than before. So if we increase our lactate threshold and VO2 max paces, we will increase our running economy and become more efficient. So one thing I want to address is those of us who run longer races, marathons, or ultras. A lot of people end up focusing on tempo runs a lot because they will improve your lactate threshold and they are closer to your race intensity than the running intervals. But the problem with that is, so if this is my lactate threshold and this is my VO2 max, I can only increase my lactate threshold until I hit my ceiling. So we really want to use workouts that will increase both of those, because if you increase your VO2 max, then you can increase your lactate threshold even higher, and then trickle down, your easy pace will raise as well. So we want to incorporate tempo runs and also those short, hard efforts. So basically, speed makes all running easier at the end of the day, and that's why we should all include it. So now that we know why we should include speed, the next logical question is, when should you start incorporating speed workouts? So since we just left off yesterday with building your base, and we talked about the 3 metrics that you can see if you're increasing your aerobic fitness, the resting heart rate, recovery heart rate, and running the same pace with a lower effort level. Once you feel pretty comfortable with the volume of your easy running in your base, it could be a good time to start incorporating speed. And if you're more of a hard numbers person, usually the aerobic phase lasts anywhere from 4 to 10 weeks. So after that point, it's a good time to start incorporating some speed. And I think the best way to get into speed workouts, if you are new to adding speed or intensity, either a newer runner coming back from injury, taking a long time off, is just adding strides to your runs a couple times a week. So strides are they're not an all-out sprint. They are where you increase your speed by lengthening your stride for about 15 to 30 seconds. And when you're doing these, the focus is on, hi Robin, the focus is on smooth speed, not, all out at your max, dying, trying to push yourself along. But it's like fun bounding, but you're going fast, if that makes sense. And the point of these is they reinforce good running form, and they increase your neuromuscular connections. So it's like a gateway into speed, as I like to think of it. And Dre actually asked me a question: how often should we incorporate strides and when during a run? So if you're just starting out incorporating strides, I would say start out 1 to 2 times per week, but you could do up to 2 to 3 times per week depending on how your body handles the additional load. And it's recommended to do them in the second half of an easy run or at the end, so that you don't go too hard and blow your easy run. So I like to do mine at the end. It's just easier for my brain to comprehend. It's like, do my easy run, do my strides, but you could also do it randomly in the second half. So with that, I'm going to go over the next 2 runs from the chart in the PDF. So we had recovery, endurance, steady state. The next run up is your tempo run. This is one used for improving your body's ability to process and utilize lactate, since these are run around your lactate threshold pace. With these, you will do them in intervals. The interval times are anywhere between 8 to 20 minutes, and your total time at your threshold pace should be 30 to 60 minutes in one run. And the work to recovery ratio for those is usually 2 to 1. And your RPE is 8 to 9. Your breathing rate is deeper and more labored than your steady state runs. So an example of one of these workouts would be a 2-hour endurance run, which remember is our easy run, with 3 by 12 minutes at your tempo pace with 6 minutes recovery. So you can see here we're doing interval length of 12 minutes for each tempo run. And then the total time at this pace is 36 minutes. So when you're building your own workouts, you can play around with how long you want your intervals to be, and just make sure that the total time from all those intervals added up is between 30 to 60 minutes. And then the highest run on that chart is the running intervals. So this is what I think most people think about when we say speed workouts. Like all-out sprints, trying your hardest, RPE of 10. These are used to increase your VO2 max pace. And the work to recovery ratio for these is 1 to 1, because you're working really hard. And these intervals are usually, the cat wants attention. Hi. These intervals are usually only 1 to 3 minutes, but you can get up to 12 to 24 minutes total at that intensity. And when you're breathing during these, it's short and rapid because you're pretty much dying. So an example for one of these workouts would be a 1-hour endurance run with 8 by 2 minutes hard, 2 minutes recovery. So you're doing 2-minute interval efforts for a total time of 16 minutes at your RPE 10 pace. So similarly to the tempo, when you're building your interval workouts, choose any interval length between 1 to 3 minutes based on what you want to work. The longer intervals will be at a slightly lower pace than your shorter intervals because it's harder to hold the same pace for longer. And then you just make sure that your total time at that intensity is 12 to 24 minutes. And then not on the chart, but one of my favorite speed workouts, especially when you're first getting into it or getting back into it, is fartleks. So they would technically fall under intervals, but they're also kind of tempo depending on how you do them. But I like to think of them as unstructured intervals or surges. So I like these because they're really easy for anyone to fit in their runs, and if you don't really want a super structured workout like 2 by 10 or something like that, you can just go out for your easy run and then spot a tree in the distance and run hard to that tree, and then run easy for a bit and then find another landmark and run hard to that landmark, and just do that like 5 times, and that can also be a way to make it a little more fun and less daunting than the actual intervals. So if you are completely new to adding in speed, you have to be a little careful because that added intensity is more stress on your body. So the recommended way to work it in is first with the strides, and then once you start intervals, it's recommended to start them on hills because there is less impact on your body, so there's less chance for injury as you're doing those harder efforts. And this helps with your form, since when you're running uphill, you're forced to land more on your midfoot and lean forward at the same time, which is the ideal, most efficient running form. And then once you feel good about hill intervals and they start to get a little easier, you can progress to intervals on flat. And just be a little careful here because that is a lot more impact on your body than the hills, so just watch out for that when you add that. And then once you're feeling great with your flat intervals, you can play around with recovery time, reduce the recovery time between intervals to make it a little harder. So that brings me to another question from Dre. She asked, how often should we do speed workouts? So if you're first starting out with the strides, like I said before, try 1 to 2 times a week, see how your body responds, or 2 to 3 times, depending on your background and your base. And then once you go into the higher effort levels, like intervals, start with 1 speed day, and then go from there, depending on how you recover, how your body responds, how you're feeling physically and mentally. And then once you are a little more adapted to speed, you can work up to 2 to 3 times a week. And when I say speed, I do mean intervals and tempo workouts. So a lot of times I've seen people do, on Wednesday will be like their workout Wednesday, and they'll do their harder intervals that day. And then on their long run on the weekend, they'll throw in some tempo intervals in the middle to have some hard sustained efforts in between their easy runs in the long run as a whole, and that also counts as a speed workout. So that would be 2 times per week. Okay, Lexi says, are the hill intervals less impact because you're falling a short distance with each step, or is it because you can get to the same level intensity in a shorter distance? Oh, that's a good question. I like how you said you're falling a shorter distance with each step. I think it's more that because you're not like pounding the ground as much, it's a lot more forgiving Since it's an uphill slope, you're more on your toes and your footsteps tend to be lighter. So like next time you're running up a hill, I would challenge you to try to like stomp your feet up the hill as you're running. And you'll probably find it pretty hard compared to if you're running on flat ground. You can really easily stomp your way around, and still be running, but with the hill, your steps tend to be a lot lighter. And if you do feel like you're stomping on your easy runs, trying to run with quiet feet can help. And that's actually one of our tips from tomorrow when we're talking about downhill running for ultras. Cool. So now I want to talk about how you fit your speed into your overall training plan for a race. Because I don't know about you guys, but hi Liz, I in the past have been really confused about like what speed workout should I do and when, and then I'll just end up doing a random speed workout and then another random one the next week and then another random one and then maybe stop doing speed at all. But what I learned in my ultra certificate and from reading this book, The Happy Runner, if you guys don't know the Roaches, they're amazing. So when you're building your training plan for a race, you want to train least specific to most specific. So for example, for ultras, they are low intensity for a really long time. So least specific would be our running intervals. So we want to do those farther from the race. And then, Dre, what sounds like you? Oh, the speed stuff, yeah. Yeah, it's hard. I mean, I feel like I never really learned it until I tried to seek it out recently. Anyway, okay. So we want to do our hard intervals farther from the race because they are not specific to our ultra. And then as we get closer to the ultra, we are working on that endurance, going really far for a long time with low intensity. And on the flip side, if you're training for like a 5K, then you're going to basically do the opposite. As you get closer to the race, you're going to be spending a lot higher time doing intense interval efforts because a 5K is very intense compared to an ultra. So, according to The Happy Runner and the Roaches, the general progression that your training plan should go is first is the aerobic phase, which we talked about yesterday, and this lasts anywhere from 4 to 10 weeks, so building your base. Second is economy phase 1. This lasts anywhere from 2 to 8 weeks. This is where you emphasize strides and short intervals to improve your running economy, to make yourself a more efficient runner. And when you do start adding in the intervals and strides, more so intervals than strides, but you do want to drop your volume initially to account for the added intensity and then build your volume back up from there, just to make sure that you're giving your body the best chance at not getting injured or overtraining. And this is also a block where fartleks and light tempo runs during your long runs are good because it gets you used to running a little bit faster, but it's not the intensity of really hard tempos or intervals yet. So then the next phase would be economy phase 2, as they call it. This lasts anywhere from 2 to 6 weeks. This is where you emphasize your lactate threshold through tempo and hill workouts. And periodically you can do speed endurance work, so longer intervals, probably around the 3-minute range rather than the 1-minute range. And your aerobic volume increases around 10 to 20% here. And you add harder tempos during your long runs. And if you are a trail runner going for an ultra, this is usually where you would add in your back-to-back long runs on trails. So you get that extra long stimulus. And then the final phase, which is the one closest to your race, which is also the one where you're going to peak in, is the specific phase. So this lasts anywhere from 3 to 8 weeks, and this is where you emphasize metabolic efficiency at your race effort. So what I was just talking about before, for shorter races, you're going to be doing more time at intensity and as the race gets closer, and you're going to emphasize workouts where the total volume is greater than or equal to the race duration at similar intensities. So for example, for a 5K, that could mean workouts like 5 by 1K at 5K pace. So then you're running each of those intervals at your 5K pace for a total amount equal to your race, just getting used to doing the pace for that distance, but broken up, so that on race day you're ready to go that hard for that long. And then on the flip side, for ultras, we do our high intensity earlier in the plan, like I mentioned, and then closer to the race, there's more emphasis on longer runs with sustained efforts on similar terrain if possible. So if you can train on similar trails to your race, you want to do that closer to your race rather than farther from your race. Although if you only have access farther from the race, that would be better than not running on those trails at all. And for ultras, usually the blocks have slightly different names than what the roaches say. It usually goes base, which is aerobic, then VO2 max, which is the same as their economy phase 1, just working on the intervals, and then threshold, which is the same as economy phase 2, working on your lactate threshold, and then endurance, which is specific to the ultras because we're working on the longer runs at sustained efforts. So all of that is around adding intensity to our workouts. And so I want to touch on adding volume just a little bit. There's not quite as much to say about adding volume, but there are some things. So Aaron asked me, does the general 10% rule apply to time, miles, or both? So in general, it applies to mileage, but only because most people make their plans based on mileage and not time. So I think it can apply to time as well. It's a very similar idea as mileage, and it's a good starting point. I do want to mention that 10% rule is not rooted in science. It was kind of just passed down from decade to decade from running coaches past, but it's not a terrible rule, and it's a good place to start. But if, like, when you're first starting out and you're not running terribly high mileage, that 10% rule could be too small. So Devin says, if life gets in the way and a workout has to be cut short, should it be a steady run, a speed workout, or hill? Which one would be missed least? So I think it depends where you are on your training plan compared to your race. But in general, one workout isn't going to make or break your race. So if life gets in the way, you have to miss a workout, then I wouldn't stress about it. Yeah, one of the things I'm going to talk about tomorrow is your being consistent is more important than doing everything perfectly, and you're probably not going to do everything in your training plan that is planned, and that's okay. When I was training for my first ultra, I was going off of the Training or Running Your First Ultra book by Chrissy something. Anyway, she had a lot of speed workouts in there that I just never did because of life. That's not to say it wouldn't have benefited me, but missing one I don't think will terribly affect your race or your training in general. But it would depend on which block you're in, on which would be best to do in your short amount of time, if that makes sense. So like if you're in your VO2 max block, then you would want to try to get some intervals in versus a steady run. But if you're in your lactate threshold, then you'd probably want to do, if you could fit in a tempo run, do that. Or I don't think it's ever a bad thing to just go for a short, easy run if that's all you have time for and you can't do a workout, because you're still going to benefit from that easy run. It'll give your body the stimulus of running. It won't add too much stress. And usually if life gets in the way of a workout, you're probably pretty stressed, you know? So I hope that response helps. So where was I? The 10% rule, right? So when you're first starting out, if you're going by the 10% rule, it might be not enough of an increase. So like if you're doing 10 miles a week and then you do 10% more the next week, so you're at 11 miles, and then the week after that would be another 1.1, and then you're at 12.1. Oh, you're welcome, Devin. So I think in that case, like increasing by 1 mile a week would be too low. So the 10% rule there is kind of like, because you could probably handle more than just adding on 1 mile. Plus, if you're training for a race and you're just adding 1 mile each week, that's going to, unless it's like a really hard mile on a really steep hill that's taking you forever, it's going to take you way too long to build up to what you need for your race, you know? But in general, that's a good rule to start with, but don't get too preoccupied with that 10% number. So with regards to adding volume, usually more conditioned athletes will be able to handle a greater increase than newer runners, which makes sense. They're more used to running, they've been doing it longer, their bodies are more conditioned for it, and they've probably done increases in the past. So if you're a newer runner, just be aware of that, but gradual increases are the safest way to keep yourself injury-free and free from overtraining. And if you are doing a volume increase week to week, don't just add it to one run unless it's a pretty small increase, like that 1 mile increase. You could add it to one run. Otherwise, if you spread it out, it would be adding like 0.2 to each run. But like, for example, if you're increasing your mileage by 10 miles week to week, then it would be better, rather than adding 10 miles to your long run, which would be really extreme, it'd be better to do like 4 to your long run and then add 2 miles to your Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday runs, something like that, just to spread out the load so that the increase in mileage is less stressful than it would be if you applied it all at once. And I just want to mention that increasing intensity and volume, while we're only talking about running here, since I'm a running coach, this also applies to any other activities that you like to do. So it applies if you start incorporating or increasing your strength training, or climbing, because I know some of my friends are here, or if you like biking or swimming, anything like that. So any other activity that you are adding to your week should be taken into account when you are also incorporating your running training increases. I feel like a lot of times people only look at running and forget about all of the other things that they're doing that will contribute to the stress on their body, you know. So naturally, when you start adding intensity and mileage, you might start experiencing DOMS, delayed onset muscle soreness, which I'm sure we are all very familiar with. So the cause of DOMS is it's primarily from the eccentric contractions of your muscles. So it's when your muscles are lengthening rather than when they're shortening, which is a concentric contraction. So the theory is that muscles are pulled to a point at which damage occurs at the subcellular level, which causes inflammation. And another theory is that less motor units are recruited during eccentric contraction, so the muscle fibers have more stress on them since there's less of them being recruited to work. And for us runners, our most common areas, as I'm sure this won't surprise anyone, are hamstrings, quads, and calves. So our hamstrings usually become sore because they lengthen to decelerate the lower leg as we're running in our gait. And so if we have a higher stride rate, which usually comes with increasing our speed, or if we are heel strikers and we land farther forward in our gait, that will put more stress on our hamstrings and they'll be more likely to get sore. And quads, these act as a brake upon foot strike, and this is especially true on downhill running. So if you guys have ever hiked up a mountain and then, that's kind of hard, but you did it, and then going down is the worst. I don't know if any of you guys agree, but yes, calves and Achilles. Mine are never happy with me either, Liz. But quads, my quads are always blown going down mountains. So it's because they are acting as the brake when I'm trying to get back to my car after being away for so long. And then calves, as Liz said, these are a problem area for a lot of us, I think. This is a common sore area when you are switching to a midfoot strike, or if you land more on your forefoot, which is what I do. So your soleus muscle, which is the muscle behind the big calf muscles that are visible, it stabilizes your foot during your foot strike, and it acts as a brake to lower your heel to the ground. So that's usually the reason that calves get sore. So if you do experience DOMS, they can start as early as 6 to 8 hours after a hard workout, and it doesn't peak until about 48 hours after, which I'm sure if you've ever had muscle soreness, the next day you're like, okay, I'm fine. And then the day after that, you're like, why am I dying so much? And when you first start incorporating a hard workout, the first week is usually the worst. But the good news is from there, your muscles start adapting, and then your DOMs are usually less than the first week, assuming that you're not doing a completely different workout that uses your body in a completely different way. So sometimes when you do have DOMs, you're just so sore you can't even fathom going for a run. So in those cases, it's best to exercise at a low intensity and try not to use the muscles affected by the DOMs, or use them in a different range of motion. So if your calves are just absolutely dying, you can't even go for an easy run, like a recovery run, it could be beneficial to hop on a bike and go for an easy ride, since your calves won't be utilized as much as with running, for example. And then massage can help depending on the severity, and it's recommended that you do not take any NSAIDs because they reduce your body's inflammation, which is the body's natural response to your muscles that need repairing. So the next thing I want to talk about will not come as a shock to anyone. We've all heard it a million gazillion times, but some tips for dealing with increasing your intensity or volume: prioritize your rest and recovery. So this is when rest days become even more important, because you need that time to recover from those hard workouts. Or if you are doing recovery runs instead of a rest day, this is when it becomes super important to make sure you're running those easy enough so as not to put more stress on your already stressed out body. And then these next two are what we've all heard all the time from everyone. Make sure you're prioritizing your sleep. We all need to sleep at least 7 hours up to probably 10 hours a night. So make sure you're getting your sleep, when you start increasing your training loads. That's when the body does a lot of its repairing and recovery, so it's really important. And along that same vein, make sure that you are eating well and also eating enough. So if you're increasing your activity by intensity or volume, you probably need to be eating a little more. And if you don't eat enough, this will just put extra stress on your body, which could lead to not recovering, could lead to injury or overtraining, which is what we're going to talk about next. And then the last tip, which I think I've mentioned earlier, but don't increase both at the same time. So don't add a speed workout and also increase your mileage by 10 miles in a week. Just focus on increasing one or the other, and so your body has time to adapt and recover without being overwhelmed. And just a reminder, as I said before, if you are incorporating speed workouts for the first time, it's recommended that you reduce your volume, at least for the first couple weeks, just to take into account the added intensity. So then our primary fear when increasing training loads is overtraining, and none of us want to be in that situation because it leads to you hating running, or in worst case it leads to a running injury and then you're sidelined for a bit and it just sucks basically. So the symptoms of overtraining, first is a lack of energy, and I'm not talking about one day you feel really tired, because we all have bad days and not every day is going to be super high energy or anything. But if you start noticing a trend, like 5 days in a row you're super low in energy, then that could be a potential sign. And then going along with that is a loss of motivation and enthusiasm for your training or racing. So basically when you're mentally burnt out. And same with this, I'm not talking about one day you had a long day at work and you had a run scheduled after work and you just really are tired and you don't want to go, because that happens every now and then to all of us. But if it's like a week straight, you don't want to go on any of your runs, then that could be a sign that you're getting a little burnt out or you're already burnt out. And then on the flip side of that, if you feel a compulsive need to train and exercise, so if rest days start becoming super stressful and you're like, I have to go running, I can't miss a running day, that could also be a sign that you're overtraining, which is kind of counterintuitive, but something else to look out for. And then this one we talked about a little bit yesterday. If your heart rate during exercise or at rest is substantially higher or lower than it normally is, that could indicate overtraining. And then inability to recover from workouts and a decrease in training capacity and intensity, those go hand in hand. If you notice you stop recovering well, could be an onset. So some things to track that can help you get in front of overtraining are energy, mood. I know for me, when I start doing a little too much, I get really irritable for no reason and then just end up, picking a fight with my fiance over literally nothing. And then I look back on it and I'm like, oh yeah, I probably did a little too much that week, getting on the brink of overtraining. Tracking your resting heart rate and just noticing your heart rate during exercise just to compare it to your average. The one thing I want to say about that is make sure if you're comparing your heart rate during exercise, you're comparing for the same effort level. So don't compare your heart rate during an easy run to your heart rate during intervals. Seemingly obvious, but yeah. And then the last two things, track your fatigue and motivation. So this is where it's good if you have a training log, just to note if you didn't feel like going that day, how stoked you felt on your workout, things like that. And then the last thing is, I think one of the most important things to track is just your overall stress, because this can help you see when, like, if you have a big work presentation that's really stressful, that might not be top of mind when you're thinking about your running training, but that stress could lead to your body being too overloaded, and then you go running and you get into the overtraining area, or, God forbid, get an injury. So keeping track of other stresses outside of your training, I think, is really helpful, especially if you can start to see trends, like when this happens at work or this happens in my relationship, then my running starts to feel really shitty. So it really helps you get in tune more with your body, and then that helps you better avoid overtraining. So in most cases, most of us at some point will be overtrained or injured, unfortunately. So if you are in that camp, my first advice is just to take some days off. You might just need a little break from running to mentally and physically recover and just come back really excited. If you don't feel like you need to take a break from running, it can be helpful to run without expectations. So run without your watch on. Don't track your time, don't track your mileage. Just go out and go for as long as feel good, and then call it a day. So that can take a lot of pressure out of running and expectations we put on ourselves. And then similarly, make running fun. So if you're just kind of burnt out on running on roads, then head to a trail if you find that more fun. And same thing, don't track mileage or a time goal, just go on trails and be happy. Or run with your friend and catch up. Or throw on your favorite music and jam out while you're running. Anything that would make running more fun and less of like a chore. 'Cause usually when you're overtrained, running turns into something that's just added to your tick list for the day, something you have to get through. So we just want to change that. And if running sounds truly dreadful, but you don't want to stop exercising, then this is a good time for you to do some cross training. So a lot of us do like other sports that aren't running. So like for my climbers, it's a good time maybe just go climbing for a few days instead of running. Or since it's winter, go skiing for a bit. Or go on a bike ride. Anything that is still exercising, since if we're runners, we probably love exercising, but it's not running. So the last thing I want to talk about, and then I have one more question from Dre. When overtraining results in an injury, as much as we don't want to admit it, most of us will be in this situation, if not once, more than once. And it sucks, but there's actually a new acronym in town. It used to be RICE, was the recommended way to treat an injury. The new acronym is Peace and Love. So P stands for protection. So avoid activities and movements that increase pain during the first few days after your injury. Elevation, which is the same as in RICE. Elevate your injured limb higher than your head if you can. Avoid anti-inflammatories and icing. Like I mentioned before, these could prolong the healing phase because they are stunting your body's natural reaction to an injury and what it does to heal. The C is compression, same as RICE. And then the E is education. So I think this one is super important. It also might just be because I really like to learn things, but I think educating yourself on what your injury is, what are the common causes of it, so you can kind of try to pinpoint what exactly happens so you can know how to prevent it in the future. And then if you go to someone to get your injury treated, learning about the exercises that will help you come back from that injury or help prevent it in the future, I think is also very empowering. And then love is load, so you let your pain guide your gradual return. O is optimism, so you want to be positive and confident. We all know the mind is a very powerful thing, so if you're injured and sitting around all day just thinking about how you're in such a shitty situation and you're never going to heal, you're never going to be the same runner, that will affect your healing process, you know? It sounds really woo-woo, and if Chelsea's still here, she knows what I'm talking about, but optimism can help a lot. And V is vascularization. So if you can't run, choose pain-free cardio to increase blood flow to your repairing tissues. That can help a lot. And then E is just exercise. So usually when you're injured, if you can't run, you can find something else you can do that will keep you healthy in most situations. In some situations, you're going to be bedridden for a while. But most of us, we get overuse injuries. You know, my foot was hurting in November, but I could still do other activities that I like. So just try to keep exercising if you can. So I like that new acronym. I think it's really helpful, and hopefully it'll help some of you if you're in an injury situation. So my last question from Dre is, when not training for a race, how often should we taper the mileage? So if you did just run a race, there's normally a transition period after the goal race where you scale back or completely take time off running, depending on what your race schedule was like, how you're feeling physically and mentally, how motivated you are to keep training. But when we're not training for a race, so if you're not racing for a long time, so like what happened last year with COVID and maybe this year depending on what happens with races, I think it depends how you feel about running, how you're recovering from running, how you feel mentally, what's going on in your life. Because if you're basically in your base building phase, you don't need to taper your mileage as much, but there are some natural times that you would want to scale back your running during the year. So I think it can help to look at your running over the course of a year or multiple years. So map out like the races you want to do, and then from there you can work backwards and see how far in advance you need to start training for those, and then that will allow you to see some pockets where you're not really training for a race. You don't really need to start building a base if you don't want to yet, and I can tell you where some good times to scale back would be, and those times could be like winter months like now if you want to focus on skiing more, or like if you had your last race in August and then you're a climber and you want to spend the fall climbing outside as much as possible, that would be a good time to taper your mileage. So yeah, I think just plotting out all of your races and then just having check-ins with yourself every now and then to see how you're feeling about running. Your body will usually tell you when you need to scale back on your mileage, and if it doesn't, you can keep going if you're feeling really excited to keep running, you know? So if you guys have any questions, now is a good time to ask them. And hopefully, Dre, my answers helped with your questions. Thank you always for sending me questions. I really appreciate it. And while I am waiting for any questions to pop up on my end, because there is a lag, I just want to remind you guys that tomorrow is the last day of this series, so the last day I'll be going live. same time as today and yesterday. Tomorrow we'll be talking about tips for trail and ultra running, which I'm really excited about. You're welcome, Jay. If you haven't been following me or anything, I absolutely love trail running and ultra running, and I want all of the women to get involved in it. And on that note, I will hopefully be signing up for a 50K on Sunday, fingers crossed. And I know some of you are training for 50Ks. Liz, I think, is doing a 100-miler this year, if I remember correctly, which is amazing. And if you guys attend live tomorrow, I will be doing a giveaway for some of my favorite long run nutrition. So if you want some nutrition, really don't want to miss tomorrow. Yeah, Liz, I feel the same way. Trails and ultras, they're just so fun. So I'm going to, yes, Yeti 100. Yeah, Liz is a true badass. So tomorrow I'm going to be talking about, first I'm going to start off with like tips for getting into trail running if you haven't gone trail running before and you're a little intimidated. And then we'll move into tips for training for an ultra, and similarly if you're kind of scared to go into an ultra, hopefully I will inspire you to sign up for one, because we can all do it and they're really fun. You're welcome, Devin. Okay, if you guys don't have any questions, then we'll end the live here. If you think of a question after the fact, feel free to message me or show up tomorrow, and then at the beginning I can address it. But yeah, thank you all for coming, and I will hopefully see you tomorrow. Bye, guys.